We put a price tag on almost everything in our lives, whether we, actually realize it or not.
Yeah, absolutely. We do it constantly.
Right. I mean, you calculate your hourly wage, you negotiate your salary, you sit there and figure out exactly how much a week of vacation is worth to you before you finally book a flight.
Exactly. It's just human nature to quantify our time.
But I want you to imagine right now someone sliding a physical contract across a table to you, and this contract poses, well, basically the ultimate human wager.
The big one.
Yeah. What is the exact price, down to the penny, of 15 years of your life?
And we're not talking about working for those 15 years.
Right, not struggling through the daily grind, just giving them up entirely, complete, absolute isolation.
I mean, it's the kind of thought experiment that just completely short-circuits the way we value our own existence.
It really does.
Because when you actually try to quantify a decade and a half of your youth, of your physical freedom, the mathematics of human experience they break down entirely.
Yeah, you simply cannot put a ledger against, the sun on your face or just a random conversation with a friend.
You can't. And that broken math is basically the beating heart of Anton Chekhov's 1889 short story, The Bet.
Or, as it's known in the Arabic translations we are analyzing today, Sorties Alrian.
Right. And I want to be clear, we're not just recapping some 19th century parlor trick today.
Definitely not. We are taking a deep dive into the truly terrifying psychological questions it poses. We've got a stack of summaries, reviews, and some really fascinating modern literary critiques of this story.
Yeah, the source material we're looking at is so rich. Our mission today is heavy philosophical analysis.
We're dissecting the ethics of capital punishment versus life imprisonment. We're looking at the true, tangible weight of material wealth and the absolute limits of a simulated reality.
And honestly, the deeply unsettling question of whether total isolation actually brings a person to a state of supreme enlightenment, or if it just drives them irreversibly mad.
Exactly. And oh man, I have to tease this early. We found a genuinely shocking, lesser-known alternate ending in the sources.
Oh, that alternate ending changes everything.
It flips the whole script. Plus, we have this surprising, real-world modern fact about the economics of the death penalty that we're going to get to later, which basically destroys the story's original premise.
It's a profound philosophical journey, for sure.
So let's just jump in. Picture the scene. The inciting incident for this entire psychological nightmare doesn't happen in a courtroom. It doesn't happen in a prison.
Nope. It happens at a party.
Right. It's a freezing, stormy autumn night, 15 years in the past. And our host is this ridiculously wealthy banker. He's throwing a lavish high society gathering.
One of the sources actually identifies this banker as Herman, and he's invited intellectuals, scholars, journalists, basically the absolute elite of society.
The wine is flowing, the fires are roaring, and, as often happens when you put a bunch of comfortable intellectuals in a warm room with expensive alcohol, the conversation turns toward the macabre.
It always does. The debate centers on the penal system, specifically the ultimate punishment, capital punishment versus life imprisonment.
Yeah, and you really have to capture the atmosphere here. These are people who have never, ever known a day of true deprivation in their lives.
Oh, yeah. They're sitting on velvet chairs, sipping fine wine, just casually debating the agonizing fates of the condemned.
Totally. And the majority of the guests, like the journalists and the scholars, they take what we might consider the progressive stance for the era.
Right. They argue that the death penalty is an outdated, immoral relic. They insist it doesn't belong in a civilized state and that execution should be universally replaced with life in prison.
But the banker completely disagrees, and his stance is fascinating because he frames it entirely around the concept of humanity and suffering.
Yeah, he doesn't argue for the death penalty out of a desire for vengeance or anything like that.
No, he argues that the death penalty is actually more moral, more humane.
Which sounds wild, but his logic is that a swift execution kills you instantly. He compares life in prison to a slow, agonizing poison.
He literally asks the room, he says something like, which executioner is more humane? The one who kills you in a few minutes or the one who drags the life out of you, drop by drop, relentlessly over the course of decades?
Logically, he's tapping into a very chilling reality about long-term confinement.
He really is.
He's arguing that forcing a human being to exist in a state of permanent deprivation, just locked away until their body naturally decays, is a form of continuous, unyielding torture.
He basically views execution as a mercy strike. To him, the state is cowardly if it chooses life imprisonment. Like they're just washing their hands of the immediate blood, but secretly subjecting the prisoner to a way worse cruelty.
Exactly.
I was thinking about this, and it feels like the difference between chopping down a tree versus putting a severed branch in a vase of water and just watching it slowly dry out and wither away over months.
Oh, wow. That's a really good analogy.
Like the tree is dead either way, but the banker sees the vase as a perverse kind of torture.
That is a very apt way to look at it. The banker views the vase of life imprisonment as just an absolute affront to human dignity. But then, of course, the counter-argument is introduced.
Right. A voice speaks up from the crowd. It is a young lawyer, only 25 years old.
One of the sources identifies him as Ivan.
Ivan, yeah. And there's a crucial detail here that makes it so much heavier. This young lawyer, Ivan, had actually just recently lost a high-stakes case defending a man who ended up being sentenced to death.
Oh, right. So for him, this isn't just an abstract parlor game at all.
No. The face of the condemned man is probably still burning in his mind. The sweat of the courtroom is still on him.
That context changes everything. It makes it deeply personal. So the lawyer counters the banker. He agrees that both punishments are fundamentally immoral, that any system designed to take away life is inherently flawed.
Right.
But, he says, if he were forced to choose between the two, he would choose life imprisonment without a second of hesitation.
His core philosophy, stated boldly in front of all these rich intellectuals, is to live anyhow is better than not at all.
He believes any sliver of life, even in chains, is superior to the absolute void of death.
But I want to challenge you, the listener, to really put yourself in that room and consider the reality of his argument.
It's a tough one.
Because it is incredibly easy to agree with the lawyer on paper, right? Life is precious. But I want you to imagine an inescapable room.
Just a box.
Yeah. Imagine being placed in a box where you are fed, you are housed, you have a bed, but you are completely severed from society. You will literally never see a forest again. You will never feel the wind.
Never have a conversation.
Never touch another human being. You are just a biological organism being kept artificially functioning for 50 years. Is the banker not actually right? Isn't that just a slow, agonizing poison?
It's horrifying. And that tension is exactly where the intellectual debate ends and the ego takes over.
Oh yeah, the ego always takes over.
Because the banker, who is younger at this point in the timeline, extremely nervous and completely driven by the arrogance of infinite wealth, he just loses his temper.
He slams his fist on the table. He shouts at the lawyer that it's a lie. He says, "I bet you 2 million rubles you couldn't last 5 years in solitary confinement."
And the young lawyer, fueled by that exact same intoxicating cocktail of youthful pride and, perhaps a desperate need to validate his own deeply held beliefs after losing that court case.
He doesn't just accept the bet, he raises the stakes.
He does. It's crazy.
He says, "If you're serious, I'll take the bet, but not for 5 years. I will stay in solitary confinement for 15 years.
It is the ultimate collision of hubris. I mean, the banker has so much money that 2 million rubles is meaningless to him. He's wagering a fraction of his bank account.
Right, it's pocket change.
But the lawyer, he is 25.
Yeah.
He is literally betting the years between 25 and 40.
The prime of his life.
He is throwing away the absolute prime of his physical existence, his chance at a family, a career, love, travel. He is throwing it all into a furnace just to prove a philosophical point to a room full of people who, let's be honest, will probably forget the conversation by morning.
The banker even mocks him for it. He tells the lawyer, "Come to your senses, young man. 2 million is nothing to me, but you are losing 3 or 4 of the best years of your life. And I say 3 or 4 because you won't last any longer than that."
So arrogant.
And then the banker points out something that becomes the absolute psychological crux of this entire scenario. The banker notes that voluntary imprisonment is infinitely harder to endure than forced imprisonment.
Yes. This is a brilliant, almost sadistic insight into the philosophy of the human mind from our sources.
Explain that, because it's so dark.
Well, think about it. If a judge sentences you to prison, the choice is removed from your hands. Your mind eventually adapts to the inevitable. The state is your warden. You can direct your anger outward.
Right.
But in this wager, the lawyer is his own warden.
He has the invisible key to his cell at every single moment of every single day.
Precisely. This constant hovering illusion of choice acts as a psychological acid.
Oh, psychological acid. I like that.
Because every time the lawyer feels lonely, every time he feels the crush of despair, his brain will whisper, "You can end this right now. Just walk out the door."
You just have to say, "I quit," and you're free.
Exactly. And that makes every single second of those 15 years an active, agonizing choice to remain in the cage. He has to constantly battle his own survival instincts.
So the contract is drawn up, the conditions are insanely strict, the lawyer is to be locked in a small lodge in the banker's garden. Complete physical isolation.
He is forbidden to cross the threshold.
Right. He cannot see human beings, he cannot hear a human voice, he is not allowed to receive any letters, and he cannot read any newspapers. He is completely cut off from the timeline of the world.
The isolation is absolute. However, he is allowed certain simulated connections to humanity.
Like what?
He can have a musical instrument, a piano. He can write letters, though obviously he won't receive any replies. And he can request things, books, wine, tobacco.
But the communication is super restricted, right?
Very. It's restricted to a tiny, specially constructed window in his lodge. He passes a written note through this little slot, and whatever he requests is brought to him in absolute silence.
Okay, so November 14th, 1870, the door locks. The 15-year clock starts ticking. And this brings us into the crucible. What actually happens to a human mind when you plunge it into total sensory deprivation, but grant it infinite access to art, literature, and its own thoughts?
It's terrifying. We are given a chronological tracking of the lawyer's Ivan's psychological evolution from the sources, and it is a terrifying descent.
It really is. It's basically a mapped breakdown of the human psyche.
Right.
Let's look at the first phase, years 1 through 5. This is the battle with physical desires.
Yeah, during the first year, the records note that the lawyer suffers from severe depression and unbearable loneliness. Day and night, the sound of the piano echoes from the garden lodge.
He is playing constantly, just desperately trying to fill the dead air with something.
But there's a really fascinating detail here that one of our sources highlights. During that first year, the lawyer explicitly requests that he be given no wine and no tobacco.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Furthermore, he refuses to read any romance novels.
That's so interesting because you'd think in solitary confinement you'd want those exact escapes.
Right. But the reasoning he provides in his notes is incredibly sharp. He writes that wine frees the instincts, and physical instincts are the mortal enemy of a prisoner.
Oh, wow. It shows a profound, terrifying self-awareness. He knows that if he drinks wine, it will stir up his physical desires. The desire for touch, for company, for the tactile world.
And there's nothing more psychologically dangerous than having those desires awakened in a box where they can never, ever be fulfilled.
It would just torture him. Drinking wine without a companion, in total isolation, would just amplify the crushing reality of his loneliness.
Exactly. And tobacco, he claimed, just poisoned the stale air of his room.
So he knows he has to keep his baseline completely numb. It's like he is intentionally putting his own humanity into a medically induced coma.
That's a great way to put it.
He reads light literature instead. Comedies, complex crime stories, things to just pass the time, to distract his brain without engaging his soul or his physical longing.
Because he can't handle anything deep yet.
I mean, think about how stir-crazy people got during the lockdowns a few years ago after just a few weeks. And that was with the internet, television, phones, families.
Ivan is doing this in a silent room with a piano and some comedy books.
And eventually that defense mechanism completely shatters.
He does. By year 2, the piano playing stops completely. The silence sets in.
That's eerie.
Very. He shifts from light reading to heavy classics. But by year 5, the dam breaks.
Oh, year 5 is brutal.
The music returns, but it's erratic, dissonant. He finally demands wine. And the guards watching him report that his behavior becomes deeply unhinged.
He stops reading entirely, right?
Yeah. He spends his days eating, drinking, lying on his bed, yawning, and talking angrily to himself.
The sources mention he would sit up at night writing furiously for hours, and then when morning came, he would tear all the pages to shreds, weeping.
What we are witnessing in year 5 is the complete collapse of the social ego.
How so?
Well, as human beings, our identities are largely formed by how we reflect off other people. We are social creatures. Our sense of self requires friction with the outside world.
Right, we need someone to bounce off of.
Exactly. When you remove that reflection for half a decade, the ego starts to cannibalize itself. He is grieving the physical world, and he is enraged at his own impotence.
The torn pages are such a tragic image. He writes furiously all night, pouring his soul out. But who is he writing for?
Nobody.
No one is reading. The realization of that void, that his thoughts have nowhere to land, drives him to tear it all up in tears.
He hits the absolute rock bottom of physical despair. He realizes he cannot survive as a creature of flesh and desire in that room. The flesh must be abandoned.
And that leads to a drastic pivot. As we enter years 6 through 10, Ivan undergoes a frightening transformation. He pulls himself out of the physical despair and pivots entirely to the intellect.
He decides that if he cannot physically exist in the world, he will conquer it mentally.
He attacks learning with a ferocity that borders on mania. He begins studying languages, philosophy, and history.
The banker can barely keep up with his requests for books. In just 4 years, he devours 600 dense, heavy volumes.
600 books, that's roughly a book every 2 or 3 days. And these aren't like light beach reads. These are dense academic texts, the grammatical structures of foreign languages, massive historical accounts.
It's intense.
It's like he is trying to map the entire ocean from inside a submarine without windows. He knows the math of the water, but he's forgotten what it feels like to be wet.
Oh, I love that.
And this leads to one of the most striking moments in his isolation, the 6 languages test.
Yeah, amidst this intellectual frenzy, the lawyer writes a letter to the banker, composed flawlessly in 6 different languages. He begs the banker to take this letter and show it to experts. He writes, "If they do not find a single mistake, I implore you to fire a shot in the garden. That shot will tell me my efforts have not been in vain."
I was thinking about this gunshot request. Because why does he need it so badly? To me, it feels like a desperate plea for an echo.
An echo, right.
He has mastered 6 languages, but language, by definition, requires a listener. It requires a community. He has accumulated all this communication power, but he is completely mute to the universe.
He needs that gunshot just to prove he still exists in the physical world.
Exactly. It's a loud, violent confirmation from the outside that says, "We see you, your mind is real." Does that align with the psychology here from the sources?
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
It is a brilliant observation. He has substituted the conquest of the physical world, which he surrendered in the bet, with the conquest of the intellectual world.
Right.
He wants to master the collective knowledge of humanity as an arrogant coping mechanism. He is trying to become a god of knowledge within his little box to compensate for being a helpless prisoner in reality.
That makes so much sense.
The gunshot is his validation that his godhood is recognized by the mortals outside.
He even writes this incredibly grandiose line in the letter, he says. "The geniuses of all ages and all lands speak different languages, but the same flame burns in them all. Oh, if you only knew what unearthly happiness my soul feels now from being able to understand them."
And the banker complies. The experts verify the letter, and the banker orders 2 gunshots fired in the garden. Ivan gets his validation.
But the tragedy of this intellectual conquest becomes apparent almost immediately because we hit year 10, and after reading 600 of the most complex, diverse academic books ever written, he just stops.
Cold turkey.
He orders 1 book, just 1. For an entire year, he sits motionless at his table and reads nothing but the New Testament.
This is a profound, incredibly telling theological pivot.
The banker is completely baffled.
Of course he is.
Yeah.
He cannot understand why a man who just devoured 600 volumes of philosophy and science would spend an entire year staring at one relatively short, widely accessible book.
But wait, isn't reading the New Testament just another form of escapism for him? Like he exhausted the scientific facts, so he just traded them for spiritual comfort. He's just finding a new way to avoid the reality of his box.
It's more complex than mere escapism. Our sources really dig into this. It's an acknowledgement of the limits of human intellect.
How so?
Think about what secular sciences, languages, and histories provide. They provide enlightenment. They tell you how the world works. They categorize the universe. They tell you what happened in the past.
Oh, okay, sure.
But they do not explain the intent of the universe. They do not answer the ultimate question of meaning.
Right, knowing the grammatical structure of 6 languages doesn't explain why he is suffering.
Precisely. What happens when secular knowledge runs out? When you have learned all the grammar, memorized the dates of the empires, understood the philosophical frameworks, and you are still just a man rotting alone in a room.
The data does not provide comfort.
No. The intellects, pushed to its absolute limit, eventually hits a wall and realizes its own inadequacy. Ivan turns to the New Testament and subsequently to the history of religions and theology because he has exhausted human knowledge and found it completely empty.
Wow.
He's no longer looking for facts. He is searching for salvation. He is looking for a cosmic reason to justify his immense suffering.
And it seems he doesn't find a comforting answer, or at least not one that sustains his sanity, because years 14 and 15, the final stretch of the bet, are described as a chaotic, frantic scramble.
His reading habits completely lose their focus. The ordered, systematic study vanishes.
It's just chaos.
He starts ordering books completely at random. One day it's a textbook on chemistry, the next day a medical journal, then a novel, then the poetry of Lord Byron, then Shakespeare, then a dense treatise on philosophy.
The analogy I keep coming back to is a drowning man.
Yes.
It's like he is swimming among the wreckage of a sunken ship, frantically grabbing at disparate pieces of wood, hoping to somehow piece together a raft to survive.
That is exactly what is happening. It is the collapse of the intellect under the crushing accumulated weight of isolation. The ordered mind has shattered.
He is pulling at threads of human thought. A poem here, a chemical equation there, just trying to feel something, trying to anchor his mind before it drifts completely into the abyss.
Because he has finally realized that the books are not the world. They are just the wreckage of the world.
Oh, that's heavy.
Trying to live through books is like trying to feed a starving man a photograph of a steak that only highlights the hunger.
So Ivan is inside the lodge, literally losing his grip on reality as the clock winds down. But we have to shift our focus. The narrative forces us to look at the man on the outside.
Right, the banker.
While Ivan was inside constructing a universe entirely out of paper and ink, the banker was outside watching his actual material universe collapse.
Time is utterly ruthless, both inside the cell and outside of it.
So ruthless.
The banker, who 15 years ago was this fearless, arrogant titan of industry with money to burn, has been destroyed by his own hubris. He has spent the last decade and a half engaging in incredibly reckless stock market speculation.
He gambled on the market with the exact same cavalier arrogance that he used to gamble on a man's life.
And he lost. Massively. His immense wealth has evaporated. He is no longer a titan. He is an ordinary, terrified, aging man who trembles at every rise and fall of the stock exchange. He is teetering on the very edge of utter bankruptcy.
And the deadline of the bet is looming. Tomorrow at noon, the 15 years will be up.
If the banker has to pay the 2 million rubles to the lawyer, he will be ruined. He will face poverty, disgrace, and complete public humiliation.
So the banker makes a dark, desperate calculation. He decides the only way to save himself is to murder Ivan.
He plans to sneak into the lodge, suffocate the lawyer, and frame the garden watchman for the crime. This is the ultimate catastrophic moral failure.
It really reveals the profound hypocrisy of the initial debate at the party, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Remember, the banker argued that capital punishment was a mercy, a more humane option. But that was spoken from a position of absolute comfort.
Right, it's easy to be merciful when you're rich.
Exactly. The moment his comfort is threatened, his morality vanishes entirely. He is willing to become the executioner himself, not out of justice, but out of sheer financial preservation.
It proves his initial argument at the party was entirely about his own convenience. He liked the idea of a swift death penalty because it was clean and out of sight. And now he wants to apply that same clean, swift mercy to Ivan, just to save his wallet.
So it is 3:00 a.m. It is a freezing, rainy, pitch-black autumn night. The banker sneaks out of his house. The wind is howling. The trees are thrashing in the dark.
Setting the scene perfectly.
He finds that the garden watchman has abandoned his post to seek shelter from the storm, which perfectly sets up his plan to frame him. The banker creeps up to the lodge, strikes a match, and peers through the tiny window into the cell.
And what he sees is horrifying. It is a portrait of absolute devastation.
The physical toll of absolute isolation is laid bare.
Ivan is sitting at the table, but he doesn't even look human anymore. One source describes him as looking like a skeleton with translucent skin stretched painfully tight over the bones.
He has long, tangled, feminine-like curls of hair and a wild, shaggy beard.
His skin has turned the color of earth, a sickly yellow-brown. He is so frail, his hands are so thin, it actually hurts the banker to look at them.
Ivan is only 40 years old, but the banker notes that anyone looking at him would swear he was an ancient, decaying corpse.
The body, denied sunlight, fresh air, and movement, has essentially begun to compost itself. The physical vessel is dying because it has been denied the physical world.
The banker pries the unbroken seals off the door. He turns the rusted key in the lock. It makes this loud, agonizing screech.
He fully expects Ivan to jump, to scream, to react to the first sound of an opening door in 15 years, but nothing.
3 full minutes pass in dead silence.
Ivan doesn't move a muscle. He is just resting his head on his frail hands, completely motionless at the desk.
The banker creeps into the room, preparing to suffocate him. But he notices a piece of paper on the table, right in front of Ivan. It's a letter.
The banker assumes it's a list of demands or a boastful celebration of the incoming wealth, so he decides to read it first.
And this letter is the philosophical core of our entire deep dive.
It is Ivan's manifesto, and we need to spend some real time analyzing what he wrote, because It is heavy.
It begins with Ivan acknowledging that tomorrow at noon, he will regain his freedom and the right to associate with other people.
But before he leaves that room and sees the sun, he feels compelled by a sense of cosmic duty to state his final truth to the banker.
He writes extensively about simulated versus real experience. He says, "For 15 years, I have intently studied earthly life. It is true I saw neither the earth nor the people, but in your books. I drank fragrant wine, I sang songs, I hunted stags and wild boars in the forests."
He literally writes about climbing Mont Blanc and watching the sunrise. He talks about seeing green forests and teeming cities.
Right. And he talks about loving women, beautiful women, created by the magic of poet's genius, who visited him at night and whispered wonderful tales.
What he is doing here is weaponizing his imagination. He has lived 1,000 lives without ever moving his chair.
He writes about experiencing the fall of grand empires and the rise of new religions.
He is essentially telling the banker, "You thought you locked me in a box, but I have traveled further, loved harder, and lived more deeply than you ever will."
He tells the banker that the books gave him infinite wisdom. All the restless thought of humanity, accumulated over centuries, was compressed into his brain. He declares himself wiser than anyone alive.
But then comes the violent turn, the crushing weight of absolute philosophical nihilism.
Because after declaring his infinite simulated experiences and his supreme wisdom, he completely violently rejects all of it.
He writes, "But I despise your books. I despise all worldly blessings and wisdom. Everything is void, frail, visionary, and deceptive like a mirage."
He has realized the ultimate futility of material existence. He tells the banker that people might be proud, wise, and beautiful, but death will wipe them all from the face of the earth, just like mice burrowing under the floorboards.
He says that humanity's history, their posterity, their grand architectural achievements will all inevitably burn to ash or freeze with the earthly globe.
It is a devastating perspective. He calls humanity mad. He says, "You have lost your reason and taken the wrong path. You have taken lies for truth and ugliness for beauty."
He uses this surreal, alienating imagery, saying it's as if people marvel at a frog instead of an apple tree, or if roses suddenly smelled like a sweating horse.
That's how completely alienated he feels from human desires.
He cannot understand how people can trade heaven for earth, how they can chase money, status, and pleasure when death renders every single bit of it completely meaningless.
And this brings us to his ultimate act of rebellion, the ultimate rejection of the banker's material worldview.
Ivan writes that to prove his absolute contempt for everything the outside world values, he is going to renounce the 2 million rubles.
The money that he once dreamed of, the money that cost him his youth, the very reason he entered the box.
Depending on the translation, Ivan declares that he will leave his cell either 5 minutes or 5 hours before the deadline.
The specific time doesn't matter. What matters is the intent.
He is intentionally breaking the contract right at the finish line, purposefully forfeiting the fortune to prove to the banker and to himself that material wealth is garbage.
The banker reads this, and he is absolutely shattered.
Not because he lost his money, he just kept it. His financial ruin is averted.
Exactly, but because he is overcome with a profound, crushing self-loathing. He looks at this broken, enlightened skeleton of a man who has transcended human greed, and he realizes how incredibly petty, cowardly, and evil his own life is by comparison.
The banker kisses Ivan's head, weeping silently, and leaves the lodge. He goes home and cannot sleep, tortured by tears and profound guilt.
And the next morning, the garden watchman comes running. He reports that the prisoner climbed out the window, went to the gate, and vanished into the world, leaving the 2 million behind.
The banker goes to the lodge, takes the manifesto to prevent any rumors, and locks it in his fireproof safe.
And traditionally, in most anthologies, that is where the story ends. It is a perfect, neatly tied, philosophical bow.
The triumph of spiritual asceticism over material wealth, the ultimate victory of mind over matter. The prisoner wins the moral victory, achieving enlightenment, and the banker is left with his worthless money and his eternal guilt.
But here is where the reality of the human condition crashes back in.
Oh man, yeah. You'd think it ends there, but the analysis from the Amir Nasr show and several detailed international critiques we pulled reveal a stunning, deeply controversial alternate ending.
Yet a continuation of the story that Chekhov originally wrote, but which is often left out of modern publications because it's so unsettling.
Yes. This alternate ending fundamentally fractures the neat, clean, moral lesson of the story and plunges it into a much messier, much more realistic human territory.
Let's break it down. The timeline jumps forward 1 year. The banker is hosting another party.
It's almost a mirror image of the first scene, and once again, the wealthy intellectual guests are having a philosophical debate.
But this time, the debate isn't about the death penalty. It's about the purpose of life itself. The debate is wealth versus asceticism.
One of the guests, reflecting a very pragmatic view, argues that rejecting life's pleasures, wine, women, art, fine food, is actually an insult to the God who created them.
If a beautiful painting exists, to ignore it is an offense to the artist. To ignore the physical world is an offense to the creator.
Another incredibly wealthy guest chimes in and says that the whole idea of extreme asceticism is a myth. He claims that no sane, healthy human being would ever genuinely reject 1 million rubles. It goes completely against biological human nature.
The banker hears this, and he is brimming with arrogant confidence. He says, "You are wrong. I know a man who rejected 2 million rubles."
He is so sure of himself because he has the literal proof locked in his safe. He bets the skeptical guest 3 million rubles that he can prove it. The guest accepts the bet.
The banker, feeling triumphant, excuses himself to go to his safe to retrieve Ivan's manifesto. But before he can, his servant intercepts him and says a strange, frantic man is at the door demanding to see him.
The banker goes to the reception room. The door opens and a man bursts in. He is pale, his face is gaunt, tears are streaming down his cheeks. He falls to his knees and grabs the banker's hand.
It's Ivan.
The lawyer.
Exactly. And Ivan begins to weep and he begs for forgiveness. He looks at the banker and makes a complete devastating confession. He says, "I was a fool. I made a terrible mistake."
Ivan tells him that all that grand philosophy in the letter, the idea that books were better than reality, the idea that he had transcended earthly desire, it was a lie.
He tells the banker that books are a pale shadow of life. He says that the person who has not lived life, who has not tasted it, has no right to judge it.
He realizes that the warmth of the sun on your skin, the physical allure and touch of a lover, the actual bite of wine on your tongue, the sight of a real towering tree swaying in the wind. These visceral, physical truths cannot be replicated by ink on paper. A beautifully written description of a mountain is not a mountain.
He admits that his grand manifesto wasn't enlightenment. It was just the desperate coping mechanism of a man driven insane by sensory deprivation.
He had to convince himself the world was garbage so he wouldn't go mad missing it.
And then, the most tragic part. Ivan delivers an ultimatum.
He says, "I am not demanding the 2 million rubles. I have no right to them. I broke the contract. But I am begging you. Give me 100,000 rubles so I can survive, or I swear I will kill myself right here."
The enlightened ascetic is reduced to begging for a fraction of the money just to keep breathing.
The banker, stunned, agrees to pay him the next day. He collapses into a chair. He realizes that he has won this new bet. He proved the man existed, but the man himself just proved the asceticism was a lie.
The banker mutters to himself, "I won the bet, but I've lost everything."
We have to push back on what this means for this entire story, because this changes everything. Does this alternate ending mean Ivan's 15 years in the lodge were a complete waste?
It really forces a deeply uncomfortable reckoning.
I look at this and I think maybe his letter wasn't a document of true spiritual enlightenment at all. Maybe it was just the symptom of severe depression, a protective, arrogant shield to deal with the trauma of missing out on life.
We desperately want to believe in the nobility of the human spirit. We want to believe that if you isolate a person, remove their worldly distractions, and give them enough books, they will emerge as a Buddha, a philosopher king who has transcended petty material desires.
But this ending suggests that asceticism is often just a retreat from the messiness of real physical existence. It asks a painful question. Is it truly noble to reject the world, or is it just cowardice disguised as wisdom?
It's like, if you can't handle the complexities of the stock market, relationships, heartbreak, and society, it's so much easier to lock yourself in a room and declare yourself superior to it all.
But the moment you step back into the sun, the moment you're cold and hungry, the physical reality returns.
Which ending feels more true to the human condition to you? The one where he walks away a stoic god, or the one where he comes crawling back for a scrap of cash because reality is too hard to face without resources?
As a psychological profile, the alternate ending is far more realistic to me. The brain cannot subsist on abstractions forever. The simulation of life is not life. The shadow cannot nourish the body.
And the banker's ultimate hypocrisy is that he was willing to murder Ivan to save his own wallet. It proves his initial argument at the party, that execution is a mercy, was entirely about his own convenience.
He didn't care about the prisoner's suffering, he cared about clean ledgers. And ironically, if we look at modern penal economics, the banker was dead wrong about the financial convenience of state execution too.
Yes. Stepping away from 19th century fiction, the initial debate between the banker and the lawyer, the death penalty versus life imprisonment, has a fascinating modern context from our sources that completely subverts the banker's logic.
Intuitively, we assume, just like the banker at that party, that the death penalty is the swift, efficient option.
We assume that you execute someone, and they are no longer a financial burden on the state's resources, whereas life imprisonment means feeding, housing, and providing medical care for a person for 50 years. It seems like basic math.
But the analysis from modern penal economics highlights a surprising, counterintuitive reality. In modern penal systems, specifically in developed nations with rigorous legal frameworks, the death penalty is actually far more expensive than life imprisonment.
When you first hear that, it sounds impossible. How can killing someone cost the state more than keeping them alive, feeding them, and guarding them for decades?
Because the state is taking an irreversible action. When the state seeks to take a human life, the legal system must build an almost infallible bureaucracy to prevent executing an innocent person.
The staggering cost is the price of certainty. It's not the act of execution itself that costs millions. It is the massive, necessary machinery of due process.
Right. A death penalty case requires incredibly expensive, highly specialized defense attorneys. It triggers an endless mandatory chain of appeals. These appeals drag through the court system for decades, monopolizing the time of judges, clerks, and lawyers.
And it extends beyond the courts into the physical infrastructure. The laboratories required for the lethal chemicals, the endless DNA testing to ensure absolute certainty, the specialized high-security housing death row.
Which requires significantly more guards, single cells, and tighter protocols than standard maximum security.
You have to involve countless government agencies, psychiatric evaluations, and administrative reviews.
Compare that to the standard costs of life imprisonment. Yes, the state pays for the inmate's uniform, their daily meals, their social workers, their basic medical care. Over 40 years, that adds up to a significant sum.
But the sheer velocity of the legal and bureaucratic spending in a capital case eclipses it entirely.
The banker and the lawyer were sitting in their cozy parlor arguing purely on the philosophy of humanity and suffering. Is it a swift strike or a slow poison? They were treating it as a clean, moral binary.
They completely missed the grinding, exhaustive bureaucracy and infrastructure required for a state to legally take a human life.
It grounds that lofty philosophical debate in cold administrative reality. It shows that our abstract concepts of justice, punishment, and mercy often fail entirely to account for the incredibly complex, often absurd machinery required to actually enact them in the real world.
What a journey this has been. We started with a foolish, drunken bet fueled by ego about the value of time. We watched a man lock himself in a box, battle his raw physical desires, and try to conquer the universe with his intellect alone.
We saw the maddening limits of that intellect, the realization that human knowledge without human connection is just a void.
And depending on which ending you choose to believe, we saw either the ultimate spiritual triumph over greed, or the harsh, humiliating realization that a simulated life can never, ever replace a lived one.
It is a profound exploration of what actually gives our lives meaning. Is it the accumulation of facts? Is it the stoic rejection of desire? Or is it simply the messy, painful, incredibly beautiful experience of actually living in the physical world, flaws and all?
I think Chekhov leaves us with the uncomfortable truth that there is no clean answer, only the reality of the choices we make with the time we have.
And that leads me to a final thought I want to leave you with. Address this directly to yourself. In our modern world, we don't need an arrogant banker to lock us in a garden lodge to isolate ourselves.
No, we don't.
We all carry a little rectangular window in our pockets, a window that connects us to all the world's knowledge, all the art, all the simulated experiences, the videos of mountain peaks and foreign cities, the endless arguments of philosophers. We have infinite access to the exact same things Ivan had in his cell.
The exact same things.
But are we, in a way, voluntarily locking ourselves in our own garden lodges? Are we substituting the messy, tactile reality of life, the actual warmth of the sun, the friction of real conversations, the physical presence of the people we love for a pale digital shadow? Are we scrolling through a simulation and mistaking it for living? Something for you to deeply consider the next time you decide to spend a beautiful evening staring into that glowing rectangle instead of stepping outside.